Welcome to the Rooted Healing podcast, where we seek to deepen our kinship with the living landscapes around us and within us. This is a space where stories heal with words that weave us closer to our wild and interrelational nature, where we explore ways to root down intimately with the land, ecosystems, communities, and practices that help us heal, reimagine, and co-create the world we remember to belong in.
Just breathe into increasingly what it feels like to inhabit a world where we are in right relationship with each other, where there is balance, where there is reciprocity, where there is love and kindness and care, where we appreciate beauty, when we celebrate community and we embody our gifts and our potential, for us to come home to the land, to the earth, to the waters, and be in service to this life as vessels of love, to really know that there is a reason that we are here at this time, and it is not just to sit and take or accept what is unfolding. It is about us standing up together, knowing that we are held by so many forces to be able to create the change that we need to birth this world that we know is possible, that we feel in our marrow and our bones.
It is Isla Macleod's deepest wish to inspire and support a remembrance of what is sacred in our lives. Guiding folk back home to the natural world, Isla is a renowned ceremonialist who I heard about through many different threads, and she's also the author of the beloved book, Rituals for Life. Through offering a container for transformation, held with the deepest love and respect, Isla helps others access forgotten treasures and their innate gifts to share with the world. Isla is devoted to unearthing our indigenous roots here on Bridget's Isle and exploring how we as humans can cultivate an immediate, meaningful, reciprocal relationship with the web of life. Isla is one of our special guests on our year-long slow study course, Deepen Your Roots, which launched on Imbolc, which was yesterday, but you still have time to join us before our first council call next week. And Isla will be joining us when we explore land lineage, finding and tending to the thresholds within our bioregion, creating ritual and ceremony and art, and finding elders' stories and songs nestled in and through these thresholds, and bringing this wisdom forth into the threshold of these times. Deepen Your Roots spans 13 moon cycles, weaving deep ecology, the work that reconnects, and a folkloric animistic exploration into the ecological self, rewoven with place. It is an intergenerational calling into bioregional guardianship and the cultivation of profound belonging. Throughout the programme, you will have the opportunity to explore and develop offerings to nourish your ecological niche and bring your medicine forth into the world. You can learn more at rootedhealing.org/deepen. And we are returning this summer with our gathering Ancestral, where we embody the ancient ways of our Indigenous ancestors, the ones who lived in full relationship with the landscapes, and through the animate landscapes, roundhouse councils, ceremonies, and intimate village life, we access their wisdom and guidance for these turbulent times with new and ancient eyes. And if you haven't yet visited the Rooted Healing website, or you just haven't more recently, I really suggest you do go check out the page for Ancestral. It makes my heart sing. And if you can't make it, maybe you know people who would love to come and you can play the connective tissue. We have a sliding scale exchange. We really want this to be accessible to all who feel the call. And There's lots of video clips and beautiful pictures by Lucy from the Right to Roam films, who we had on the podcast previously in the episode Stories of Regeneration. So you can really get a sense of the magic that unfolds at this gathering. Accompanying this episode is a book giveaway of Isla's Rituals for Life for our patron community. Rituals for Life is a guide for those searching for the sacred in the everyday, a life of meaning and a sense of belonging. This book invites you to discover how ritual can provide the bridge back to wholeness through aligning with the wisdom of nature, the cycles of life, and re-enchanting the world with wonder and beauty. Head to patreon.com/rootedhealing to enter this beautiful giveaway. I really loved this conversation. Isla has such a grounding, wonderful presence, so I hope it brings you the nourishment you seek.
So my name is Isla Macleod, and I have been living with many lands throughout my life. And so a particular landscape that has shaped me is quite hard to distill down to one or even some. But I think what has been with me throughout is this earth rhythm. There is something of a pulse and a resonance with the lands that I have lived with that have deeply shaped me, from Barbados to Nigeria to Japan and to the southeast of England. There's something of a thread that connects them all, and have just through my journeying between them perhaps, but I feel there's something in that song of the landscapes that I've lived in that have deeply shaped me as I am now. For the last 14 years, though, I have been deeply moved by and learning from and in relationship with the yew tree. So I wish to bring in the spirit of the yew to this conversation. And Badger. Badger wants to come in. Welcoming Badger, the keeper of the roots medicine. Thanking them for being here and for inspiring me so much on my way.
Oh, I love that you brought in the badger. I so often bring in the badger when I'm in circle and there's this kind of invitation. Where I grew up, there was an entire badger village deep in the woods, so big actually that the BBC wanted to come and film there for one of their documentaries. And so I always felt quite intimidated in the reign of the badger there.
I can imagine.
Why were you moving around? Is this right from early childhood? Is this something your parents did with you?
It's my father's job. So it invited a transition usually every 3 or 4 years to a different country. Although I started boarding school in England when I was 8. So that became something of a familiarity. The South Downs way, I was thinking, became really present with me in that time of my adolescence as a place to resource myself. And I remember some of the oak trees at my school, that really big elders that were sort of on the edges of the school grounds, that became a real sanctuary and a place of homecoming for me when I felt like I really didn't know where home was. So I think that trees for a very long time have provided that kind of rooting that I didn't feel in my body. But it was something that enabled so much of an insight into the different ways cultures live and how we are in relationship with the earth and with life. And even though I know myself as being from these lands now, there's been a long time of having to piece together the different parts that felt very scattered, but they feel like they're all in at home now.
I feel this potency of Imbolc more than I ever have before, and especially with the snowdrops coming out earlier than I'm used to, and just really feeling that energy. And something I've been so inspired by your sharing over the winter months was this ritual idea of going into a dreaming den and being close with the earth even in midwinter. So I'd love to hear you speak about that and what has been coming through for you,
Mm.
and how you're feeling in this emergence of Imbolc.
Mm. Well, actually, this is why the badgers are here. So that practice was inspired by the badgers, who I would spend time with when I lived in some woodland in West Sussex. There was also a badger set that was fairly near where I lived in a yurt. And it was an intentional practice to court the darkness during that time. And I really wanted to befriend it. So it involved a lot of time out at night. And where the badger set was a place of inspiration, I suppose, of how to return to that more animal way of being in relationship with the rhythms and cycles of the year. And knowing that they were there quietly dreaming and hibernating, I would just go and sit sort of nearby with them and try and connect with that intention of how to be entering into that sort of space of hibernation, of dreaming in the winter months. And it became a sort of creative practice to make something that I called death lodges, which were usually just branches and things that I would make into some kind of small den around the winter time, and enter into them and go into some kind of imaginal process of dying, returning to the earth, and really imagining my body composting and letting go of my body and identity. And then from that place, see what would emerge. And sometimes it would be a very intentional practice of composting the past, to really go over the last year and reflect on particular experiences and lessons that I had learnt, some things that maybe I need to sort of forgive and move on from. And then with that space that's been created, there's an opportunity to sort of, it's like you've weeded the soil, sort of tilled the soil and prepared the ground for then what seeds I want to tend to and grow for the next cycle. And so dreaming into what I personally wish to create and give life to in my own sort of personal practice, but also with work and as a mother. And then I would expand that dreaming outwards. So I'd start to sort of dream for my immediate community, people that I live with, my family, friends, and expand that out beyond to the human community. And then it would go to sort of the greater web of life. And placing myself at the center and seeing or feeling that potential of, with a seed, that we can really create these ripples that go out so far beyond just this limited sense of self. And it can be sort of actually visualizing what the world could be and how we inhabit it and how we hold ceremony and how we come together in community. And sometimes I just have to keep almost prodding myself when I can feel that there's almost a limitation in that. So like, how can we really dream beyond what we think is possible? And it's hard because, you know, we only have certain images and narratives that we've been introduced to and sort of live by. And so that's why it's become a really integral practice for me over winter, is how can I keep pushing those edges of what I think is possible, and being close to the earth in that way, you know, when it's cold and would probably much rather be beside the hearth, is also something of a sacrifice, I think we could perhaps call it, that in the winter we are giving ourselves over almost to the kayak, to the spirit of winter, who is partly the destroyer. So we have to sort of break down and let die all parts of ourselves. But then within that, there is this transformative process where we're reshaped in some way by the winter, by the darkness. And there's so much fertility and potential within that, you know, within the soil, within the seeds. So really leaning into a space that feels almost, you know, it's a dark kind of cavernous space. Sometimes it can be amongst the tree roots or in a hollow yew tree. I found gorse bushes sometimes. So any space that either the earth sort of invites me to come and be with them and dream with them, or somewhere that I've created. And usually I'll stay with one place for that year and return to that place throughout that winter, and then I'll create or find another place the following winter. And it just creates such a beautiful rhythm to the year to know that that's a really simple way of being that reconnects me with the sort of essential nature of winter as being actually a really rich time of transformation and visioning on the inner level, but not so much, externally
Mm,
visible of what the changes are. That's when Imbolc comes in.
mm,
And as you say, the snowdrops have come early this year, and there is a rejoicing in that, to see their tenderness, after so long of not seeing the flowers and the fruits above ground, to sort of recognize that there has been all of that going on beneath the soil, hidden from view, is reassuring, and it's beautiful. It sort of reminds us as humans that there can be such tenderness from often what can be so challenging, that we can still push above ground against the odds almost, and in their delicate sort of way of being, that we're reminded to go really gently across this threshold of Imbolc, that it's not quite time for us to be all guns blazing, planning the year ahead and putting everything in motion, despite what our culture sort of demands of us, that there is still this time to be really slow and careful about tending the seeds which need that protection. And they need to be almost sort of, what's the word? If you're not ready to share it with the world, for instance, that there's actually a need for us to keep close these little seedlings that are growing, not to
mm,
rush and not to sort of push them before they're ready to be visible or to share them with the world. And I can feel that this Imbolc, more than ever, is inviting that, not to rush,
mm.
not to feel like we have to be showing up in a way where our body is actually saying, no, I need to go slow, I need to take my time. So that's the invitation I'm really with at this moment.
I think it really activated my child mind as well, because when you're small, you just want to crawl inside things
Mm,
and create those spaces and be so close to the earth
mm,
innately. And then
mm,
we grow up and walk around on our 2 feet and sort of exist in this sphere of mind and productivity.
mm,
Um, and it's been so strange this year seeing people get very into their New Year's resolutions and,
mm,
yeah, productive January, when I have just felt like, whoa, no, this
mm,
is midwinter. This is dreaming time. I want to
mm,
slow down even more. So, yeah, really honoring the way you've shared that and what you've inspired in me. You've spoken of thresholds, and this is something I'd love to go into more deeply with you, because I just recognize the idea of a threshold and the practice of moving through thresholds is so unacknowledged in modern
mm,
culture. And in a place of perpetual productivity and doing mode, we seem to lose this space for that inner transformation and that witnessing and, yeah, everything to unfold. So, can you speak to the idea of thresholds, why they're so
mm,
important, and maybe give some examples of how you create reverence for them with your
mm,
work and your life?
mm. I don't think I'd heard of a threshold in probably until I was my late 20s. Never heard of that word. And as you say, it's not something that's really celebrated or even acknowledged in Western cultures. And yet, when we think of life, we start life, we're born and enter into this phase of continual transformation and evolution until we die. And so birth and death are obvious thresholds, which represent, it's a change from one state of being to another. And within the life that we live, there are almost continuous thresholds. But because we're going through this continual process of change, we often don't pause to acknowledge that there has been a shift or a transition. So then we are really not able to integrate those changes and to celebrate them or to grieve them. And with the opportunity of a threshold crossing to make a ceremony around it, to gather community together, we're really honoring that there are passages through which we are transformed in a significant way. And in doing that, we can celebrate that there is this seed of potential within us that we're constantly feeding, nurturing, tending throughout our life, of our gifts and what we're really here to bring. And my experience of creating thresholds for myself is that each time I've intentionally stepped across one, I feel I'm inhabiting more of my wholeness, that it's like bringing back pieces of myself that have been fragmented from childhood or just cultural expectations or what I've inherited even. And it's this feeling each time of crossing a threshold of being brought back to myself in the fullest sense of self, in relationship with all beings. And I think, well, the actual definition, threshold, comes from threshing or thrashing, and it's the idea of the grain being separated from the chaff. So there is this separation that happens, which allows some kind of breaking apart. So it's also like the seed, at this time of year, the seed has to crack open for that seedling to come forth. And it's the death of the seed, but it's the beginning of that plant, of that whatever it might be growing. And so we have to surrender something of ourselves at a threshold. There is a death to an old way of being, and then there's an intentional stepping into a new chapter of our life. And on an individual level, there are many that we experience throughout, sort of starting school was something I found very significant for my son and I. So we planted a yew tree in the garden the day of his first day at school. For me, it was important to acknowledge the greater sort of wisdom and knowledge of the earth as being what feeds him above all else, despite what the school, as well as what the school will teach him. And then obviously as women, we have different rites around our blood. So our first menses at menarche, going through to pregnancy if we choose to have a child, and then through to menopause, our last bleed. And then more well-known threshold crossings might be graduation ceremonies or weddings, christenings, bar mitzvahs, funerals. And they all recognize that there's been a shift in our way or who we are, and whether that's death or whether that's beginning something new, that there is within the ending of something the beginning of something else. And for me, this speaks to what is perhaps the most essential wisdom that we can embody as humans, as being part of this natural world, which is these cycles of life and death and rebirth. And that way of seeing and perceiving reality can completely recalibrate our understanding of what life is and what death is. And our relationship with death is so confused, and it's not something we really explore much without the framework of religious traditions, without there being spaces for us to talk about more, metaphysical, existential questions. Many of us don't really sit with what it is to die. And for me, it's something which I feel is an ongoing training, that every threshold is a way of us learning how to die well, so that when we do meet that final threshold, that we are able to do so freely and fully, that we can really let go of the attachments that we have had to our body, to our identity, to this world, to allow for this mysterious transformation that happens at death, to wherever that might then lead us. So I think that there's something that the threshold crossing through different rites of passages, through both personal experiences we have and also collectively, that are always bringing us back to what this life is really about, how we can be intentional about the transformations that we go through, so that we can be fully present to witness ourselves and each other evolving and embodying more of our potential, so that we can really meet our death in a good way and become good ancestors. That it's a difficult thing to have conversations about sometimes, but the more that we open up to death being a gateway and another threshold, the less fear there is. And I think that the more that we look at those places where we carry fear and realize that there really isn't anything to fear, we can live more fully and courageously and show up for what these times are asking of us, which is to sit with and witness the pain and suffering of the world, the death of so many of our brothers and sisters, and the plants and the landscapes, to be able to hold space for collectively this transition that we're in, and do so with as much love and presence as we can. So the thresholds are a way of almost training us continually for that, and also of really coming home to ourselves, embodying more of who we are, and finding our way to return to what is the essential nature of our being, which is this creative energy spark that is always within us from birth to death, but that sometimes we need to take a pause to really allow it to work on us, for us to really appreciate what it is that's being let go of and what we are, or what's wanting to emerge through us, which I feel is really present at this time of Imbolc. Like, what is emerging within us? And it might not be clear, we might not have the words for it yet, but we can feel it. There's something that is sort of energetically stirring, maybe stoking our fire, and that wants to be given life to and born through us in some way. So how can we hold space for that? And rite of passage ceremonies and threshold crossings are one way of holding space for that.
When I think about honoring and creating my own pathways into spacious thresholds, I have one part of me that goes off and is by myself, and nature is my witness, or the unseen is my witness. And I'm very much in that space of exploring what is arising through myself. But then there's also such power in being witnessed by fellow humankin
Mm.
at these points as well. So I'd love to hear you speak to, yeah, the moments when that witnessing, that community and that witnessing really takes it to a different level of initiation.
Mm. It's taken me some time to welcome human witnessing in my own ceremonies, and I think that's because there weren't the people in my life to hold that space for me. But I also felt so drawn to the trees and the stones, particularly being able to hold a particular presence of witnessing that I just didn't think or didn't feel humans were able to. But thankfully, over the last sort of 8 years, 9 years, there have been invitations to be a part of ceremonial processes where we were in community, either stepping across certain thresholds, or I undertook a wilderness rites of passage training and undertook that practice of a wilderness vigil. And that particular threshold, crossing that and returning that with the people that I had journeyed with throughout that year, was hugely transformative in my understanding of the power of witnessing from humans. Because it's like having accountability buddies in a way, that they are then really able to hold you to that commitment or to that change that they see in you. They're able to reflect back what they see in you having returned, changed in some way. And also having so many of us, that feeling that we have of being alone and isolated in the world, to be able to gather the community together to celebrate something significant in your life or in the life of the community, is a way of repairing so many of these broken relationships. And beyond the human witnessing, there is the more than human holding always at thresholds and ceremonial processes. But with the humans, there is this beauty that comes also from the permission that you give them also to be embodying what it is that maybe is inspired by seeing this process in you. And the holding of love and care and kinship also that comes from a circle, a tribe, a community, being there to really celebrate your return. So when I think about the traditional sort of vision quest practice in Native American culture, was for that transition between adolescence and adulthood. And it would be 4 days and 4 nights out on the land, solo, fasting. They're sort of crying for a vision of your life, like, what is it that I'm here for? And when they returned after 4 days, it was a big time of ceremony that the whole community would be there to witness them coming back, ready to share what their gifts are in this life and be able to use them to sort of feed the community. And for the mirroring that can come from that is a way for then that young person to fully embody and integrate the experiences of their quest. sometimes if you come back, and I've had this experience from some kind of rite of passage that only I was there for, the only human anyway, then there's times when it's hard then to pull together all the different threads of that experience to really become who you are. But I think the group energy of that sort of constellation is something also that really supports and empowers you to continue with the work, because actually often in ceremony and certainly in thresholds, it's like you're given a seed that you then have to nurture in your life, and it takes effort, it takes attention and intention, and it's like you're giving that purpose also not just for yourself but for the good of all and for the good of the community. So I think that's another reason that at this time we need more of those opportunities to be able to accept that there is a sacred responsibility that we all have for our lives and for each other and for the earth, which can be upheld by community and in togetherness.
I'd love to hear more about your wilderness vigil, because there is this dance, isn't there, where the indigenous traditions that remain intact are clearly going to influence the lost threads elsewhere in the world. And so, what does it look like for you being a part of something more rooted on these lands?
I feel like there's been a way of humans being in relationship with the earth for thousands of years that involves being present with a place and just sitting with a place to become known by that place and to know that place. And as part of a shamanic training that I undertook, they gave us an invitation to spend 24 hours in a place on the land, with a place on the land. And I chose a yew tree in the Forest of Dean. And it was a wild night, which involved really having to lean into, again, those edges of trust and shedding where I felt apart from the beings that surrounded me to really become woven with that place. And it was hugely significant in my journey with the yew tree, but also with understanding more of what can occur when we are still in a place. That so often we're walking through a landscape, or for me often, I'm creating a ritual, there's a doing involved. But with a wilderness vigil, you're really just holding space for what wants to emerge. So it's about being fully present, quiet, listening, still. And often there's a circle which you can draw, which you don't leave that circle. So you really are encouraged to be still. And the insights from that night, I know, are still percolating and unfolding in my life. And that was 12 years ago. And in 2022, I undertook a 4-day and night fast and vigil on Dartmoor, which has become a place that has deeply enhanced my understanding of my wild self and connected me with parts that I had certainly forgotten. It really has activated a sort of deeper primordial feminine energy within myself, and I really wanted to go and just be listening for that, like, what is this ancient voice in this land that I've heard whispers of, but I really want to just devote myself to listening to in these days. And I was with a hawthorn tree that was actually, I now know, dead. I thought it was just taking a long time to come into leaf at that time at Beltane, but I've returned since a few times, and it makes sense because what I ended up creating was a death lodge, because I'd found lots of bones in the area. So I created a sort of bone lodge around this hawthorn, and it was woven with the waters, which were just a couple of feet down. There was a stream, the Snowdon Brook, and it was a singing stream that just all day and night was there quietly just singing to me. So that, combined with this sense of the bones of that place and this particular tree that I now call Bone Woman, invited this time of really returning to the center point for me of what it is to be inhabiting, you might call it the medicine wheel or this sort of map of self. where you're working through the different sort of directions. So there were practices I did do every morning and night to root myself in the landscape, which involves sort of praying to the directions. And in that, you're sort of always working around this idea of the center and the spiral. And from this place of me and my heart and my soul, I am able to be in relationship with this place. And for everybody of this earth, I feel if we could all dedicate, even if it is a couple of hours, but particularly, an overnight quest, because it brings up different kind of edges, to sit and listen quietly and meet ourselves, but also then meet the land in that way, it would radically shift our perception of who we are and our relationship with the natural world. So I hope that it is something that gathers more interest, and there's more opportunities for people to explore that kind of quest. And it can be, it can be something which a medicine walk also offers an invitation to be, intentionally moving through a landscape. And it can be in an urban landscape as much as somewhere rural or wild. With a vision quest, it would be hard in an urban park, I think, to dedicate oneself to it. But it's possible to go to be present with a place, to listen to what is emerging in that place and notice what occurs when you're sitting still, whether that's the movement of an animal or the sound of a bird song, but to really be aware of all the different signs that come into view that you're aware of, will open up this experience and richness of perception to include the more than human world as a part of your experience that you're not separate from. And that, I think, is the essential medicine, that we come to know that we are not separate from place, from the natural world, or from ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. I feel a few things bubbling around really facing the sensation of death, or the dreaming of death, the link that has to threshold and rite of passage, and, for lack of a better word, shamanic initiation of some kind. And I'm also feeling, speaking about city dwellers and just trying to find those places where people can do some sort of vigil, the shifting baseline that has created so much fear of being in nature alone.
Mm.
I did an interview with Sam Lee, and we were talking about going out in the night to listen to the nightingales. And even me, I've grown up on a farm and had such a gift of connection with nature. I still, if I'm not familiar with the land, I still feel very intimidated to go out into it by myself at night. And I don't know if there's a way to link what I've just said there around death and the darkness and the night and that fear. But if you have anything to riff off that, I'd be curious.
Mm. So for so long, we as humans have had this story of the battle between the light and the dark.
Mm.
It forms so many of our myths and religions. And within that, there is the duality through which we perceive life, and that creates this sort of separation. And for not that long in our history, but certainly the last few thousand years, there has been an emphasis on the light at the detriment of the darkness. Be that through kind of Christian understandings of heaven and hell, but through so much more than that, there is a fear that has been just trickling through our cultural narratives and our mythology for the last few thousand years. And within that, we have lost a sense of connection or appreciation of the darkness within which all life begins. As I spoke to earlier, that's the place where, the womb, the seed, the soil, they're the most fertile and regenerative, places of life. And yet somehow we've come to see it as this place to fear. And because it is the unknown, and we struggle with what we cannot control, we struggle with where we feel that we aren't able to plan, with our very left brain way of thinking. We're also really rooted in this idea that we need to have visible, sort of tangible evidence for something to be true. So within the sort of darker, and I say the darkness is not something which is literally the absence of light. It's also a sort of an energetic, mythical space, and it is a liminal space. It's the place where we are transformed. And the sort of rejection of the darkness, and within that there's also, I think, the relationship with the feminine. So we look at the receptive sort of yin qualities, where the earth receives the seed. It's something where we're able to really hold and make space for, as opposed to perhaps that more yang, dynamic, active way of being. And so there's been this rift that's been occurring increasingly to where we are now, where we don't trust the darkness, we're afraid of the unknown, we don't really want to confront our death or our dying or our grief, because they are also perhaps wilder aspects of our experience that we have been told are not safe or they're not acceptable. And that's why I think I spoke to, when I moved to the woods, I had this intentional ongoing ceremony, as it were, to court the darkness, because I felt within it there was something, there was potential there that I felt like I had been denied. And I'd actually had a period of depression in my 20s that made me quite afraid of the darkness and that place in my psyche that felt, shadowy, and places that I hadn't been able to accept or acknowledge. So by physically going out into the night to go for walks or to sit somewhere at night time was a way of me kind of saying, I'm not afraid. I'm ready to look here and what it is that wants to teach me, from this space of unknowing. And the threshold invites us to practice how to be with the unknown in a good way, how to actually trust that there are forces much greater than ourselves that are carrying us through our lives, that there is something of an essential current that is inherent in all life, and that we can almost lean into that as something which is holding us and which is benevolent. I think that's something also that we've forgotten, that there is something deeply benevolent about this life and this earth. We don't need to be afraid. We don't need to feel on guard, that we have to constantly be sort of protecting ourselves and cutting ourselves off from things which feel challenging. And I think that there is the challenge within living in a more urban landscape, for instance, where there is less opportunity to meet those wild edges. There's light, street lighting everywhere, so there literally is a challenge of actually inhabiting the darkness.
Yeah.
But there also doesn't feel like many places to go and kind of stretch into those places which might feel a little bit uncomfortable, whether that's to go and howl under the moon because you're raging something, or whether that's to sit, on the side of the road really in your grief and trusting that actually it's okay to be seen in that. There are ways of creating spaces within cities and towns, particularly making more use of our imaginal landscape. So we don't literally need to go out into the physical landscape to be able to start to explore these themes and push and sort of expand those edges. It's helpful, and it might make it a little bit more accessible, but that we have got this underused superpower of our imagination, and we can enter into that space and start to inhabit the darkness and get curious about what might be calling to us from that place. And being more with the unknown is something which, ceremony and ritual offer, and other practices around creativity, that there are ways we can stretch that muscle to become more adaptable and flexible, to be able to meet change. And in these times, that's something we really do need to be working on. Like, how can we create a strong container to be able to hold the changes that we're going through collectively, with less fear, with less need to sort of know what is coming or how we can control the outcome, but something of welcoming the chaos. That was something my winter dreaming took me to quite deeply, of being in the darkness with that chaotic energy, which is both destructive and creative, touching into something around the very nature of creation, being at that point of it's the same as sort of the life and death piece, but there's something in that for me which is really juicy, and I can't quite articulate, but I don't know if that answers some of your wondering.
Yeah, I provided you some threads and you wove a lovely tapestry. Um, some imagery that was coming through for me so strongly was really wild spaces. I think of beavers and how there'd be these
Mm,
trees fallen everywhere and this jaggedness to the death of the landscape as well as the
mm,
life. City parks or even National Trust properties where I love going. I love going and
mm,
spending time in these big estates with their big lakes and everything. But they're so pristine. And
mm,
the death is literally scraped away. The fallen leaves are scraped away. The dead
mm,
trees are removed. And there's something about this feral nature of a landscape that
mm,
yeah, we've massively suppressed it. And it shows the suppression of the feral aspect of our psyche.
mm,
And that was really coming through hearing you speak. When I started getting into ritual, from, experiencing these beautiful big ceremonies when I was away in Latin America and with very powerful plant medicine teachers, and then coming away and thinking, okay, how do I bring a piece of that into my life? And these rituals were so clumsy at
mm,
first. So I started one of the ones I did after many conversations with women who were doing women's work was, to start offering my blood to the
mm,
earth and to start coming into a conversation with the moon because my cycles were all over
mm,
the place and really dysregulated. And this in itself was so clumsy. I just had this memory of I was volunteering at a space and I was teaching yoga and it was a permaculture farm and then had this permaculture garden and I would sneak out of the house and trying not to be seen by anyone else or, at obscure times of the day. And I'd use a moon cup at the time and I would just very frantically, I guess, try and offer
mm,
my blood to the earth and be hiding behind a tree and I'd mutter something to the moon. And I remember this sense of, oh, this isn't going to do anything. This is effort. I've been so drawn to deepen my inquiry into older life ways. And so it's deepened and it's deepened and it's deepened. And now I feel it's so natural to
mm,
do some of these things that earlier on were just so clumsy. And obviously, you've written a book all about rituals and bringing them into the everyday and this sense of they don't have to be these big moments that we pay a lot of money for to go and
mm,
experience in another country. There's something we can really bring into the everyday. Um, and so I'd love to hear you speak to this phase of growing up in a culture that has had most of its rituals taken away from it, stripped away,
mm,
and then finding this path, feeling enchanted by it, but feeling really clumsy in
mm,
those early stages, or even that internal voice of this is ridiculous. There's more important things to do.
mm,
Um, and really just showing up and continuing to show up through that
mm,
threshold.
mhm, mm. Bless you and your younger self. I think, firstly, the clumsiness is something which I actually find is a real sign of our humility, that we are trying to remember and piece together what has been lost. And we are naturally inspired by other cultures that we might have come into contact with where those traditions are still really alive and the songs are still sung and they know how to hold ceremony in a good way.
Mm,
And I think naturally that there is a grief that we don't have those traditions to turn to lean into, and for us to be shown the good ways of being able to be in right relationship with life. And I think that is part of the process, that when we start to want to live more intentionally and creatively, possibly through ritual crafting, that there will be this time of almost sort of faking it to make it, that
mm,
there is that need to just like to see how it feels, and maybe these things or certain things you're doing just don't resonate, and that's okay, that's not your way. So there is an invitation, I think, with these lands and at this time, I think actually for the whole world to some extent, for us to be reimagining what ritual and ceremony is and how we can give permission for ourselves to be more playful with integrity and with being in relationship with the other forces of nature and other powers that you might be working with, to ask them for guidance and practice again that art of really listening. So, wanting to spend time really listening and learning from the trees, I often doubted what was coming through. and assuming it was just something from my own imagination. But I was able to inquire in a meditative practice about how where I thought I was separate from the trees was actually also just a story and a way of seeing that was preventing me from recognizing that, of course, it was going to come through me. I wasn't going to be able to hear the tree literally speaking, that I'm not apart from the tree. When I'm in the field of it, as that being is a part of me, then what comes through me, be that an audible voice or a flicker of inspiration or maybe a felt sense in my heart, that I started to learn to trust that more. And so when I would create ritual space initially, and it was clumsy in its way, I had the map of the wheel of the year and the moon cycles as my sort of anchor points that I intentionally wanted to start a ritual practice with. And I didn't really know what I was doing at that time. And so I would go to the trees or I would go to the waters and ask for their help. And my belief is that those in the past on these lands that were creating ceremony, those that shared the songs and the stories, have embedded them into the landscape, and they have been there quietly sort of resting, but also, gently pulsing and calling us back to them. And now is this opportunity for us to almost go back to the source, so that we don't need to have the form necessarily. We don't need to have certain ways of doing things, but actually we can ask directly the trees, the soil, the waters, how can we be in service to you? And I think that opens up a much more a spacious way of being and curious way of being and feeling, that invites in that sort of spontaneous and creative impulse. And when we're really able to be present with that, then the ritual will unfold exactly as it needs to. But as our mind, might over time just sort of want to say, oh, this is silly, or that's not going to work, or with the ritual of offering your blood, I know the first time I heard of that, I was deeply shocked. This was a long time ago, that was something women did. But there was the shock in it, I remember, was so great that I knew there was something there for me to explore because of how much I was affected by hearing it. And I think that there is that feeling of where we meet resistance, there's often a real gift for us there. And so kindly, gently, maybe pushing through those places where we feel ourselves holding back, or we doubt ourselves, or we judge ourselves or others, just see where the invitation is to sort of go beyond that and to continue that exploration of wanting to be in service and listening. I think the art of deep listening is really at the root of ritual, and through that then we cultivate more of a sense of trust. Because within a ritual space, it's a bit like, again, you're creating this container where there's a threshold where you sort of leave the everyday and you enter into this sacred space. And then you're in this liminal space, which is like the cocoon, which we know we're all, I think, feeling partly this winter process. We go back into this cocoon and are remade. And in that space, we are essentially just goo. And it might make no sense at all what we're doing. We might not even remember quite who we are or where we've been. But if we're fully present to that unfolding, that's when the magic really happens in ritual space. And trusting that we will in some way be changed by it to then return and sort of come back, closing that space and returning to the sort of everyday, we're able to really inhabit more of the way that the threshold of the ritual space is a container for our continual evolution, and just getting curious about what that might be, and letting go of the dogma and the beliefs and the need to control, the need to be right. And I think something which I often find is helpful is beginning any ritual, when I call in my guides and allies and other beings to support me, I always just start with, like, please forgive me if I don't honor you in the way my heart wishes to, or if I'm clumsy, or if I don't get the words right. Just to have that as a sort of opening, that I think it then, or not to forgive anything that might unfold, but just sort of also starts you in that place of humility, that you are learning and you're trying and you're showing up.
well, the humility it takes to accept wholeheartedly that we have to begin again. We've lost so many of those threads, but I love this idea that they are in the land's dreaming.
Mm,
One of the reasons I love so much your winter practice of this hibernating, dreaming den or a death lodge, because in the summer or just generally in the warmer moments, my favorite practice, more effective at not only regulating my nervous system and putting me into a really beautiful state of being, but I think really healing me on many, many levels, is taking naps directly on the earth.
mm, mm,
And actually, I was in Dartmoor for the first time last summer, and we went on a 5 hour vigil into the
mm,
lands as a part of a song dreaming immersion that
mm,
I was doing. And
mm,
I was there and I found a beautiful big horse chestnut tree, and I was trying to find all these songs and feel into it. And I actually got really frustrated with myself. I was in internal autumn, PMS. So the self-critic was really there and I was tired. And then I just went for a walk, took some deep breaths, and I found this big, big boulder resting across a stream. So it was acting as this
mm,
bridge across the stream. And there was just a sun beam coming through the canopy
mm,
of the forest onto this boulder. And I
mm,
lay down on it and I slept, I guess,
mm,
for 2 or 3 hours. Okay, coming in and out of that liminal in
mm,
between wave-like sleep where the trickling water and the sounds of the woods. And because there were a few of us scattered across a lot of land, I'd get the occasional whisper of someone's song coming through the
mm,
trees. And it was so beautiful, just this simple practice.
mm,
And afterwards, I felt like everything had been harmonized,
mm,
on a level that I think we're trying to achieve when we go to yoga or we go jogging or whatever
mm,
it is that we're doing to try and feel some sense of ease. It
mm,
was resting on this warm rock was
mm,
everything I could have ever dreamed of.
mm.
I think we need more of that, those kind of
Absolutely.
spaces and rituals.
There's actually something that I've been playing with the last year, which is how to actually become the ritual, to inhabit the ritual as our body, as temple, as altar, through living with that kind of intentionality and presence. And it obviously undermines potentially a lot of my work, which is to create ritual. But I've been seeing that I often would go out onto the land with various baskets with, various elemental beings and maybe some crafting things to be able to create ritual. And I think there was a story there of feeling not enoughness, and
Mm,
actually that just showing up to bear witness to the beauty, to be present with life unfolding, and to be this vessel through which life unfolds
mm,
is in itself a ritual. And I think, as you say, there is the need for much more of that and to simplify it, to not have necessarily the kind of complexities where our mind might get involved and say we're doing it wrong, or
mm,
to actually really just inhabit that way of being that is in continual in continual love, let's say, with the way that life is inviting us to be present with all that is arising moment to moment. So I love that invitation. And maybe we could try it at different seasons as well, just with a few more blankets around us.
yeah, definitely.
mm,
Yeah, you said something there about beauty.
mm,
And I know John O'Donoghue's spoken to this a lot, this idea of beauty and what it really is, and how we really create the capacity to be receptive to
mm,
it. I think of the digital infiltration into our lives that,
mm,
so much of our lives is 2D now.
mm,
And I think of some of the ceremonies you hold, and these baby blessings or when someone's pregnant on blessing this transition or um, just generally tapping into the wheel of the year and all the beautiful things that you do. I'd love for you to speak about this co-creation and witnessing of beauty, and
Mm,
perhaps also the loss of it when we
mm.
don't have those access points as well.
I was actually speaking with someone yesterday about the experience that both of us have when we go into large supermarkets,
Oh,
which has become increasingly sort of overwhelming to my nervous system because you're surrounded by so much stuff, commodification at its peak without much substance. And even though it's food, the majority of it, it doesn't feel like nourishment.
mm,
And there's so much which is mass produced, and we are so detached from the process
mm,
of products being created and arriving, in the supermarket. We have no idea where that's come from, which farmer sowed the seed, who plucked that from the field. That there's just no sense of that, the process of, and actually the relationship with all the beings that were involved in
mm,
something being created, as opposed to a basket woven of willow with each part, tended to, carefully made useful, something which is beautiful and functional. And you just know in your being the difference in holding a plastic wrapper of something out of a confectionery shop compared to something handmade with natural materials.
mm,
There's a soul inherent in one, whereas the other feels inanimate. And beauty for me is the gateway to the divine. I think John O'Donoghue is called Beauty is God, and that there is something which everyone of this earth can agree upon. It might not be that we agree the same things are beautiful, but that we all are attracted to beauty, that we all recognize beauty, that we all are fed by it in some way. And that's very leveling. There aren't many things worldwide that really invite that of us, that we can all be appreciative that beauty is something that nourishes our soul. And I think it began when I started to create earth offerings, so using different plants that I would find in an area. I just wanted to thank a place that I had been with, or sometimes it was a way of sort of opening up to the spirit of that place. And there was something of feeling like the beauty that I was collaborating with these natural beings was feeding that place. And it was a really visceral felt sense that there was something that, in a mysterious way, that I was literally kind of feeding the earth of that place with the beauty. And so increasingly, I've started to see that even the ways that we go about our lives, in the sort of gestures of our bodily movements, in the way that we speak, in how we adorn ourselves, how we dress, that it's not to be underestimated or seen as sort of frivolous or even self-indulgent, to be wanting to show up in the most beautiful way that we can as a gesture of our gratitude for this gift of life. That's how it feels for me, that we can give back in different ways to sort of feed all that feeds us. And there is so much beauty in this world. And how can me, this self, create more of that to feed the earth now, but also the future generations in some way? I find is a really helpful navigation sort of compass point to guide me in my life. Just to be able to have moments when I actually really take a breath and stop and appreciate the beauty of something as well, not to rush past that
mm,
snowdrop or that sunset, just to really look and pay attention with your full presence and let it feed you, let it nourish you, and it will kindle more of that sense of hope, of inspiration, of a way of being which is innately creative. We are creative beings, and the more that we sort of bring that potential online, we can create solutions to the current crises that we face. But beauty seems to be some kind of like, it is another seed that we can allow to really grow and bloom and flower, as a way of reminding us that life is a gift. It is so rich as a canvas through which we can express and paint and adorn with more beauty. Um, so I feel like it's a path in itself. If we just want to, commit to a path, it could be the path of beauty, and that's enough, which in itself is quite radical.
mm, I found that in the autumn that I was doing a lot of, I guess, what some might call eye open meditations. But I really, the colors of the autumn,
Mm,
I could feel them moving into my eyes and in a sense of vibrational quality move into my body.
mm,
I was so mesmerized. I was in your neck of the woods actually,
mm,
looking after a friend's house and cat in
mm,
well the edge of Wiltshire
mm,
near Frome, and
mm,
I really took pleasure in this. And then I discovered this wonderful children's forest songs where they sing about the trees. And it's obviously their songs must go into forest schools a lot. And I
mm,
just started singing these songs round and around and around as I was
mm.
walking through the trees. And I went for a walk with Nareda. Do you know Nareda
Yes, I
Olives?
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this, and I was saying how inspired I felt by these songs and how I really wanted to embody them more. And we were walking through these really beautiful tall beech trees, and the leaves were falling down, the light was shining through, and we just stopped and stayed in silence for some time. And then she sung a
Mm,
song
mm,
of the beech trees to the beech trees. And
mm,
I swear they were listening, they were receiving it. The way the leaves started falling and the wind sort of stopped, and it was her
mm,
voice traveled through the woods. And I just thought, oh, just
mm,
absolute beauty.
mm.
And she finished, and we stayed in silence for some time longer. And then I said, is that from one of the children's forests? And she said, no, I just made it up. And I recognized in myself that need to the desire to cling and that wish, oh, I wish I'd recorded it. I wish I'd,
Mm,
captured that moment because it was so beautiful. But then it's that trust, isn't it, of that's what it is. And we need more of those moments where it's just fleeting and it
yeah.
comes through and it's in relationship.
Mm, mm,
So that's what came
mm,
through as you were talking about beauty.
mm. It's a fine edge, isn't it? Because as you are aware, I do share quite a lot on social media, and I've always loved the medium of photography and word, so it makes sense for me to do that. But of course, it sometimes feels a bit strange in the middle of a ritual or a prayer to sort of get the phone out. So there's a lot of times I don't record things,
Mm.
and there will be that song that comes and goes, never to be heard again.
Yeah.
But there is something in that. An offering is an offering. It's something we give over, and for it only to be heard that once by those beech trees, like what a gift, and for you to be witness to it as well. But something where we do want to sort of hold on as well to beauty is something quite interesting, because it's obviously it's transient, particularly if we look at it in the natural world. We're seeing the changing colors of nature, or the different ways that the landscape shifts throughout the seasons. So I think beauty also reminds us of that transience, and that's why beauty is such a sort of way of feeding our soul, because it's not something that we can grasp. It's not something that we can hold. There is something very elusive about it, and because it's fleeting, it sort of makes it all the more special to have witnessed.
Mm. Yeah, I'd love to hear you speak about the Wheel of the Year. I've recently had some people reach out asking for resources, and I found your website to be one of the best places to send people about
Mm,
it. And I recently did an interview with Matthew Zylstra. It's not out yet, but he spoke to some of these belief systems that the ritual itself is actually pivotal to the order of the cosmos. That if they
mm,
don't perform this ritual, then something will go wrong.
mm,
And I was like, well, it's kind of true. When we don't celebrate and come together to really honor these transitional moments in our year, we lose connection. And look
mm,
what's happened in a society of lost connection. Things are definitely
mm,
not in a coherent, harmonic order. So
mm.
I'd love for you to share about the Wheel of the Year and how it's a compass for you.
So I think I mentioned earlier that I worked with the Wheel of the Year and the lunar cycles as a map of having these gateways throughout the year through which I wanted to create ceremony, that I recognized there was something to be witnessed at that time in what is changing in the outer world, which I am mirroring in my inner landscape, and how to sort of be present for that and hold space for that. And in a culture where we function very much in linear time, it is instantly sort of shifting our perception to start to see time as a circle or in cycles. And the Wheel of the Year is a map which firstly connects us with the natural world and the way that we are completely woven with these rhythms, as well as the lunar cycle. And obviously within the body of a woman, if you're going through your bleeding cycle, that also relates to the same sort of changes within the lunar cycle. And starting to work with that intentionally helps us to appreciate the cycles of growth that we go through, and also, the growth of a seed, and also the way that we are in relationship with the natural forces and powers. So starting with, for instance, in the East is the realm of the air in the Celtic medicine wheel that I work with. And that's where the place of the seed, the rising sun, it's where we initiate and begin the next cycle. So with the air element, we use our voice, our breath, as that which creates the vibration to sort of start the wheel in motion, to begin another cycle of growth or creativity. And then we move into the south, which is the realm of fire. And here it's sort of also connected with our phase of childhood and being in sort of with our creative, sort of more playful explorations and our relationship with spirit. But in the fire realm, it is very much about that process of creativity, from having the seed of an intention to then what alchemical process unfolds for that to grow. And then we move into the west, to the realm of water, and that can be seen as our sort of adolescent phase. It's connected with the deeper sort of mysterious realms of dreaming, of liminal space, of thresholds. It's where the sun sets, so we're entering into that place of the darkness, the darker time of the year, and it's associated with the equinox of autumn. And within that place of the west, it starts this sort of journey back into the north of winter. So there is this transition between each of the cardinal points, where we also have these 4 fire festivals, and they come every 6 weeks in between the equinoxes and the solstices. And they have this, we have Imbolc coming up in the next few days, and the fire festivals are really interesting points of transition within the natural energies. So we're moving Imbolc from the element of earth in the north to the activating element of air in the east. So in the north, I didn't finish there. In the north, we have the element of earth, and it's the place of adulthood, of elder, of death, of that place of rebirth that happens at the winter solstice. So the map has both the seasonal changes and the elements woven into it. And then there's all kinds of other ways that we can read that map as a journey of our soul evolution, of integrating sort of wholeness, of being able to more consciously create balance in our lives. If we notice that we are, for instance, inhabiting a really sort of mental, cerebral space, and maybe we're having a lot of negative thought patterns, then we could look to balance that with the opposite direction, which is water, so that we might need to bring about more of a sort of emotional caretaking, to inhabit more of the sort of heart and soul space, to bring about greater sort of balance in the way that we are perceiving life. So there's opportunities to see it in so many different ways, and I know people that practice with it in all kinds of beautiful, like ritual ways, but also in more of a sort of psychosomatic journey. And it's just such a rich way, again, of having an invitation to find your way with it. There isn't a right or wrong. There is this way of starting to approach the cycles and the rhythms from your center point, which is obviously at the center of the wheel, and seeing where you might have particular resonance. Maybe there's elements or directions that you feel more drawn to and more at home in. So how can you then create more balance by working with some of the others? But with the Wheel of the Year as a map for ceremony, it's something which just at its very basic level to have 8 points throughout the year where you pause and reflect on what has been, on what's wanting to emerge and what time you're stepping into, what you want to sort of intend for the next cycle of growth. It gives that pause amongst the ongoing process of change to just be with yourself, to be with the natural energies, to see how you can sort of marry the two and come back into balance and right relationship with the energies which are emerging. So it's felt like such a resource for me when there weren't any other sort of ceremonies or rituals that I inherited. It felt like there was something in that I could work with, and also honouring the new and the full moon within that also as touch points to understand more this cycle of birth and death and rebirth, and to embody more of that in a felt sense, and make sort of intentional threshold crossings each time there is a different festival to celebrate, which I find really just restorative in a sense of coming back also to being with myself and being intentional with how I'm living, sort of consciously co-creating my life and not feeling like it's sort of being done to me, that actually I am involved in that process. I find really empowering. And it's something I think we can all relate with, no matter what creed or culture or religious background we have. There is something which we can all appreciate in the turning of the seasons. And even, in the southern hemisphere, it's obviously a bit different, and equatorial regions, but there's always a map with which we can work to understand our relationship with the natural world and the cycles.
I think it's such a good compass for life, and applicable to micro moments and macro moments and everything in between. To close, I'd love to invite you to share about your mothering and the springing forth of a new generation, and your dreaming, your visioning. Yeah, I just want to bring it back to the very real, very humanness of who you are and who we all are.
Mm. Mm. To be a mother has been such a rite of passage for me, and I'm continually being grown by being a mother, thank goodness. And the way that I relate to being a mother, because it didn't come, let's say, naturally. I didn't see it coming in this lifetime that I would be. And when I connect with this sense of devotion to the earth and wanting to be in some way a part of midwifing this birth of a new earth, I know that my role as a mother is strengthening me in so many ways to be able to hold space for that, and to kindle hope when I feel despair, to create beauty when I see such destruction. There's something of knowing that I want my son to inherit the earth, and for those generations yet to be born, that inspires such courage in me. And I have felt a lot this winter dreaming around the struggle of being a mother, self-employed, and raising my son on my own, where there is this tension of wanting to be devoted to and available for my son, sort of devoted as a mother, and yet I get such a sense of purpose from my work, and I love my work, but it has meant that I'm just not so available for my son. And I was sitting with that when we were both ill over New Year, and feeling that I really don't want to be missing out on these years with him, because I'm working weekends and evenings sometimes. And so what's actually been kindling is quite a sort of rebellious and radical voice in me, that it's not okay to sort of be perpetuating these systems where we are expected as mothers and just humans to be constantly on this treadmill of needing to earn money just to meet basic needs. Is so it's the antithesis of what nature is offering, which is a thriving and abundant and generous spirit, and the recognition of mother as sacred, and to be supportive of the mother, to be, in the village, to really recognize how well they were supported by others, the elders, other family members, and how isolating it has felt as a mother, despite having an amazing family that enable me to do so much of my work when they care for my son. So I've felt actually a real shift in the last few days, actually, around how I'm going to move forward with my work, so that I am partly more present for my son, but also more able to respond to the needs of these times, because I found my diary was just completely full last year, and I'm so grateful for that. But it also meant that I had less time to listen to the land, to pray to the waters, to be out with those more than human beings that I have really devoted myself to over the years. I felt like I wasn't able to give my time to so much, and that's where I want to be putting my energy. And so it feels that I need to trust more in this, well, the way of nature, that I will always be supported and held, and that shifting this paradigm around sort of the need for growth and productivity and wealth, to actually really value what I care for, what I love, what I hold sacred, is coming through more and more. And I wish that for all of us, that we don't feel limited by the systems that we're in, but actually we listen to those places that either feel full of rage or grief and say no more, that we would not continue to be a part of these systems because they are so out of alignment with the way of nature, but also as our potential as humans. And to gather strength in that there are many of us that are really willing to create new paradigms around the sort of working life and monetary systems. It may not be clear what they are yet, but to keep that vision, that dream alive, that there is a world possible where there is no poverty or violence or fear or war, and really inhabit that as a possibility in a meditative or imaginal space, to really bring an aliveness to that vision without the need for the mind to kind of say, oh, well, how's that going to happen? And we've been doing this for years. And just breathe into increasingly what it feels like to inhabit a world where we are in right relationship with each other, where there is balance, where there is reciprocity, where there is love and kindness and care, where we appreciate beauty, when we celebrate community and we embody our gifts and our potential, for us to come home to the land, to the earth, to the waters, and be in service to this life as vessels of love, to really know that there is a reason that we are here at this time. And it is not just to sit and take or accept what is unfolding. It is about us standing up together, knowing that we are held by so many forces to be able to create the change that we need to birth this world that we know is possible, that we feel in our marrow and our bones, because it is something that has been embedded in us, this blueprint, this map. And it's just about unveiling and revealing more of that. And it is coming. It's coming.
If you found resonance with this conversation and the themes in this episode, please do head to rootedhealing.org/deepen to learn more about our year-long slow study course. And you can really get a sense of what is being born forth here, this multi-generational calling, not only becoming bioregional guardians for our communities and ecosystems in this moment in time and finding our active hope, but really creating beautiful pathways forward for the generations to come. Thank you for being here with the Rooted Healing community. We offer nature-led ceremonial gatherings, legal and safe psychedelic-assisted psilocybin retreats, embodied deep ecology courses, and a growing collection of nourishing resources. Visit rootedhealing.org to learn more. You can also find us on social media, and all the links are in the show notes. There are some wonderful acts of reciprocity and cross-pollination that you can do if you are enjoying this podcast, which will help others heal and connect, inner and outer landscapes. You can subscribe, rate the show 5 stars, leave a review, and when we get to 50 reviews, we're doing a juicy giveaway. You can share episodes with your community. Sometimes those podcast recommendations from others have been the most potent medicine I've received in the moment. And you can join our patron community where you can actively place value in this resource and receive bonus material, book and gift giveaways, meditations, workshops, episode transcripts, community discussion, and discounts to our events. Your monthly contribution helps us cover the costs of running the show, and our hope is to gather enough abundant gifters to really go the extra mile with this podcast. These acts of connection support this work. Thank you. The music in this episode was gifted by Bonnie Medicine from her latest album, Wide Open. If you'd like to gift your music to the Rooted Healing podcast, please reach out via the link in the show notes. I'm your host, Veronica Stanwell. Thanks for listening.